The blistering summer sun had no mercy on Laurel Forsyth as she stumbled from her father's ranch house, the sound of shouting still ringing in her ears. "You are no daughter of mine." Those words cut deeper than any knife ever could. 23 years as Henry Forsyth's beloved daughter erased in an instant, all because she had given birth to a daughter instead of a son. New Mexico Territory, 1878, was no place for a woman alone, especially one with a 3-month-old baby. Laurel wiped tears from her dirt-streaked face as she hitched her small wagon, her hands shaking with both fear and determination. Little Emma slept peacefully, unaware that her existence had cost her mother everything. "Madam, you need a hand with that?" The deep voice startled Laurel, causing her to nearly drop the harness. She turned to find Xavier Kincaid watching her with concerned eyes. He was new to these parts, a rancher who'd bought the property bordering her father's land just 6 months prior. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes that seemed to see right through her brave facade. "No, thank you, Mr. Kincaid. I can manage," she replied, her voice barely holding steady. Xavier stepped closer, noticing her tear-stained cheeks and the small bundle in the wagon. "Forgive me for saying so, but you don't look like you should be heading anywhere right now." Laurel couldn't respond. The lump in her throat threatened to choke her. How could she explain that her husband of 2 years had died in a mining accident before Emma was born, that she'd returned to her father's home only to be cast out when the baby wasn't the grandson her father had expected? "It's getting dark soon," Xavier continued, his voice gentler now. "Where are you planning to go?" "I don't know," Laurel admitted, her shoulders slumping. "Somewhere. Anywhere." Xavier looked back at the Forsyth house, then at the small bundle in the wagon. Understanding dawned on his face. "They've turned you out. It wasn't a question." Laurel nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "Because of the baby?" She nodded again, a single tear escaping despite her efforts to contain it. Xavier Kincaid had seen his share of hardship since coming west. Orphaned at 16, he'd worked cattle drives and built his own small ranch through sheer determination. He recognized the same resilience in Laurel's eyes, even as they brimmed with tears. "I have a proposal for you, Mrs. Forsyth," he said, removing his hat respectfully. "My ranch house has a small attached cabin that my foreman used before he left last month. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean, and it would give you and your little one a roof until you figure things out." Laurel hesitated. She barely knew this man. "I couldn't impose." "It's not imposing if I'm offering," Xavier insisted. "And I could use some help around the place. My sister was supposed to come out and keep house, but she's taken ill and can't travel. If you're willing to cook and help with some chores, I'd consider it fair exchange for the cabin and provisions." Emma began to fuss in her basket, and Laurel reached for her daughter, cradling her close. The reality of her situation hit hard. She had nowhere to go, no money, and a baby depending on her. "Just until I can make other arrangements," she finally said. Xavier nodded, his expression unreadable. "Just until then." 3 days later, Laurel had settled into the small cabin attached to Xavier's ranch house. It was simple but clean, with a small bedroom, a sitting area, and a tiny kitchen. Through a connecting door was Xavier's larger home, though he'd assured her privacy by giving her a key to lock the connecting door from her side. The arrangement was proper enough. Xavier spent most daylight hours working his ranch, and Laurel focused on keeping house, cooking meals, and caring for Emma. She'd notice him watching sometimes not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but with a curious sort of wonder, especially when she held Emma. "You're good with her," he remarked one evening as Laurel rocked Emma by the fireplace after serving supper. "She's easy to be good with," Laurel replied with a small smile. It was the first genuine smile she'd managed since leaving her father's home. Xavier cleared his throat. "I've been meaning to ask. What happened to her father? If it's not too forward of me." Laurel's smile faded. "Thomas was a good man. We were married for nearly 2 years when he took work in the silver mines. There was a cave-in." She swallowed hard. "He never knew I was carrying Emma. I found out just after we buried him." Xavier nodded solemnly. "I'm sorry for your loss. My father never approved of Thomas. He was a schoolteacher before the mining educated, but not wealthy. Father only allowed me to marry him because Thomas promised to work Father's ranch." Laurel sighed. "After Thomas died, Father insisted I come home. He told everyone he would raise his grandson properly." Her voice cracked. When Emma was born instead. A man who would disown his daughter for having a girl isn't much of a man at all, Xavier said, his voice tight, with controlled anger. He gave me two choices: give Emma to an orphanage so I could try again with a suitable husband of his choosing, or leave. Xavier's jaw clenched. No real choice at all. No, Laurel agreed softly, kissing Emma's downy head. No choice at all. The weeks passed, and summer faded into autumn. Xavier's ranch was modest compared to the Forsyth spread, but he worked it with dedication. Laurel found herself watching him from the window as he trained horses in the corral, his movements confident and gentle with the animals. She learned he was 28, had come from Missouri after the war, and had worked 5 years to save enough to buy his own place. He was educated, surprisingly so for a rancher, and often read by lamplight in the evenings. One night, a terrible storm blew in from the mountains. The wind howled against the cabin walls, and Emma wailed in fright at each crash of thunder. Laurel paced the floor, trying to soothe her daughter, when a particularly violent gust rattled the windows and the roof began to leak. Within minutes, water was pouring in through a broken section of the ceiling. Clutching Emma to her chest, Laurel hurried to the connecting door, knocking frantically. Xavier answered immediately, as though he'd been waiting. "I was just coming to check on you," he said, taking in the scene with alarm. "Grab what you need. You'll have to stay in the main house tonight." He helped her gather Emma's things and led them to a bedroom that was clearly his own. "You take this room. I'll sleep by the fire." "I couldn't take your bed," Laurel protested. "You're not taking it. I'm giving it to you and Emma for the night," he insisted, his tone brooking no argument. Later, when Emma had finally fallen asleep in a makeshift cradle Xavier had quickly assembled from a drawer and some blankets, Laurel found herself sitting across from him by the fire. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything." Xavier nodded, poking at the fire. "I've been thinking," he said after a long pause. "That cabin isn't fit for winter with a baby. The roof needs work that can't be done until spring." Laurel's heart sank. She'd begun to feel safe here, to build a routine. "There are 2 other bedrooms in this house," Xavier continued. "They've never been used. It would make more sense for you and Emma to move into the main house." "Mr. Kincaid, Xavier," he corrected gently. "We've known each other nearly 3 months now." "Xavier," she amended. "I don't think it would be proper." "Proper?" He chuckled softly. "Mrs. Forsyth, Laurel," she interrupted with a small smile. "Laurel," he continued, returning her smile. "We're 30 miles from the nearest town. The only people who come out this way are the supply wagon and occasionally old Jim Porter when he's hunting. Nobody's here to judge propriety." "I judge it," she said firmly, though without heat. "I have my reputation to consider. And Emma's future." Xavier studied her for a long moment, firelight dancing across his features. What if there was a way to make it proper? Laurel's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "I'm not one to talk around things, so I'll just say it plain. I admire you, Laurel. Your strength, your devotion to your daughter." He set aside the poker and leaned forward. "I'm not proposing love. I barely know what that is. But I'm offering partnership, protection for you both. A name for Emma." Laurel stared at him, speechless. "You don't have to answer now," he added quickly. "It's just something to consider. For practicality's sake." "Is that what marriage is to you?" "Practical?" she asked quietly. Xavier looked down at his hands. "My parents had what you might call a love match. Didn't stop my father from drinking himself to death or my mother from working herself into an early grave to support us after. I figure respect and common goals make for a sturdier foundation." The storm raged outside, but inside, a different kind of tempest brewed in Laurel's heart. She studied the man across from her, a good man, if somewhat reserved. A man who had shown nothing but kindness to her and Emma. "I need time," she finally said. "Take all the time you need," Xavier replied. "The offer stands." Laurel did take time, nearly 2 weeks of careful consideration. During those days, she noticed Xavier making improvements to the house, building a proper crib for Emma, ordering books and fabric from the supply wagon. He never mentioned his proposal again, but his actions spoke volumes. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Emma asleep in Laurel's arms, she reached her decision. "Yes," she said simply. Xavier turned to her, eyebrows raised in question. "Yes, I will marry you," Laurel clarified. "For Emma." For security. 4. Partnership. The smile that spread across Xavier's face reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. I'll make you a promise right now, he said solemnly. I may not be able to offer you passionate love, but I will respect you, provide for you both, and never, ever hold Emma's gender against her. Tears pricked Laurel's eyes. That's more than many women get in a love match. They were married by a traveling preacher 2 weeks later, a simple ceremony with only old Jim Porter as witness. Laurel wore her best dress, the one she'd packed when fleeing her father's house, and Xavier had somehow procured wildflowers for her to hold. That night, after putting Emma to bed in her new nursery, Laurel joined Xavier in what was now their bedroom. Nervous tension hung between them. We don't have to, Xavier began. I know, Laurel interrupted. But we're married now. It's right that we should. What followed wasn't the passionate love Laurel had once known with Thomas, but Xavier was gentle, considerate. Afterward, lying beside her new husband in the dark, Laurel felt something unexpected, not love, not yet, but a growing warmth, a seed of possibility. Winter arrived with a vengeance, blanketing the ranch in snow. Isolated from town, the three of them formed their own small world. Xavier taught Laurel to shoot a rifle just in case, and she impressed him with her natural aim. She introduced him to the joy of reading aloud by the fire. Together, they weathered blizzards, treated a sick calf, and celebrated Christmas with simple gifts they'd made for each other. Emma grew stronger each day, beginning to smile and coo. Xavier, initially awkward with the baby, gradually became more confident holding her. Laurel caught him once, whispering stories to Emma when he thought no one was listening. My father used to say that girls were just as smart as boys, he told the baby. He said they just had to work twice as hard to prove it. But you won't have to prove anything to me, little one. The tenderness in his voice made Laurel's heart swell with something deeper than gratitude. February brought tragedy when Jim Porter arrived with news that Laurel's father had suffered a stroke. Despite everything, she insisted on visiting him. Are you sure? Xavier asked as he hitched the wagon for the journey. After what he did, he's still my father, Laurel replied, bundling Emma against the cold. And I'm not the same woman who left his house 7 months ago. Xavier studied her with admiration. No, you certainly are not. The homecoming was far from triumphant. Henry Forsyth lay diminished in his grand bedroom, half his face frozen in a permanent grimace. He could speak, but with difficulty. His eyes, however, were alert and filled with bitterness when they landed on Laurel. Why? Come, he rasped. Because you're my father, Laurel answered simply, holding Emma where he could see her. And because I wanted you to meet your granddaughter properly. Henry turned his face away. Not what? Wanted. Xavier, standing quietly behind Laurel, stepped forward. Mr. Forsyth, with all due respect, you have a beautiful, healthy granddaughter and a daughter any father should be proud of. If you can't see that, the stroke affected more than just your body. Laurel gasped at Xavier's boldness, but Henry's eyes snapped to the younger man with new interest. Who? You. Xavier Kincaid. Your daughter's husband. Henry's gaze moved between them, confusion evident. Husband? Yes, father, Laurel said. Xavier and I married last fall. A complicated emotion crossed Henry's partially paralyzed face. Ranch. Yours now. Xavier shook his head. I have my own land, sir. I didn't marry Laurel for property. Then. What? Xavier looked at Laurel, something soft in his expression that she hadn't seen before. Because she's the strongest, most devoted mother I've ever known. Because she deserves a partner who values her. The visit ended shortly after, with no reconciliation but perhaps a seed planted. On the ride home, Laurel was quiet, processing her father's coldness and Xavier's surprising defense. Thank you, she finally said as their ranch came into view. For what you said back there. Xavier kept his eyes on the road. I only spoke the truth. Still, it meant something to me. He turned to her then, his usually guarded expression open. You mean something to me, Laurel? More than I expected when I made that practical proposal. The confession hung between them, neither ready to define what exactly that something was. Spring came to the ranch, bringing new calves, wildflowers, and Emma's first attempts at crawling. Laurel and Xavier fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side during the day and sharing quiet evenings. Their physical relationship had grown more comfortable, sometimes even tender, though neither spoke of love. Word came that Henry Forsyth had died in his sleep. Laurel grieved not for the man who had rejected her, but for the father she'd once adored. The funeral was a tense affair, with Henry's brother making it clear that the Forsyth ranch would pass to him, not to Laurel. He changed his will after you left, Uncle George informed her coldly. Said no granddaughter would inherit what generations of Forsyth men had built. Xavier, standing tall beside his wife, simply nodded. Then we'll be on our way. Laurel doesn't need her father's land. She's helped me build something of our own. As they drove away from the Forsyth ranch for the final time, Laurel felt a curious lightness. I thought I would be angry, she admitted, or hurt, but I just feel free. Xavier squeezed her hand. Some inheritances are burdens disguised as blessings. The summer brought its own challenges. A drought threatened their crops, and rustlers hit neighboring ranches. Xavier began sleeping with a rifle beside the bed and insisted Laurel keep her own weapon close when he was working distant pastures. One scorching afternoon, Laurel was hanging laundry with Emma playing on a blanket nearby when she spotted riders approaching 4 men, moving fast and purposefully. Heart pounding, she scooped up Emma and hurried inside, grabbing her rifle. Xavier was checking the north pasture, too far to help. Through the window, she recognized one of the men, Tyler Reed, a notorious troublemaker who'd worked briefly for her father years ago. Mrs. Kincaid, Reed called out, dismounting. Just want a word with you and that husband of yours. Laurel stepped onto the porch, Emma on her hip, rifle held casually but visibly in her free hand. Mr. Kincaid isn't here right now. What business do you have? Reed smirked, eyes taking in the rifle with amusement rather than concern. Heard old Henry Forsyth's spread went to his brother instead of his daughter. Seems a waste when his daughter's right here. That land was never mine to claim, Laurel replied evenly. What's your interest in it? George Forsyth hired us to clear some problems. Reed's smile turned predatory. Offered us a bonus to check on his niece. Make sure she's not planning to contest the will. Laurel tightened her grip on the rifle. As you can see, I'm quite content with my own ranch. You can tell my uncle his property is secure. Reed stepped closer, his companions fanning out. Thing is, we rode by that north pasture on our way in. Saw your husband's fine herd. Got us thinking a woman alone might be willing to sell cheap, start fresh somewhere else. Ice filled Laurel's veins as the men's intentions became clear. They'd separated Xavier from the ranch deliberately. I'm not alone, Mr. Reed, she said calmly, raising the rifle to her shoulder. And I'm not selling. Reed laughed. You planning to shoot all 4 of us with that? While holding a baby? She might not, came Xavier's voice from behind the men. But I certainly can. The rustlers whirled to find Xavier sitting astride his horse, rifle aimed steadily. Now, gentlemen, I suggest you turn around and ride out while you still can. Reed's hand twitched toward his holster, but Xavier's warning shot kicked up dirt at his feet. Next one won't miss, Xavier promised, his voice deadly calm. The standoff lasted only seconds before Reed signaled his men. We'll be seeing you again, Kincaid. I sincerely hope not, Xavier replied, not lowering his rifle until the men had ridden well beyond the property line. The moment they disappeared, Xavier dismounted and rushed to Laurel, gathering her and Emma into his arms. Are you all right? Did they hurt you? We're fine, Laurel assured him, though she couldn't stop trembling. How did you know? I saw their tracks heading toward the house. Circled back through the creek bed. He pressed his forehead to hers, his breath uneven. Laurel, when I saw them approaching the house, I've never been so scared in my life. She looked up at him, surprised by the raw emotion in his voice. Xavier, the thought of losing you, either of you, his voice broke. I realized something today. This isn't just a practical arrangement for me anymore. Laurel's heart pounded. What is it then? Love, he said simply. I love you, Laurel. I love Emma. The thought of anything happening to my family. He shook his head, unable to continue. Tears filled Laurel's eyes as months of growing affection crystallized into recognition. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have for some time now. Their kiss was different from any they'd shared before, not dutiful or gentle, but passionate, desperate, filled with newfound acknowledgement of what had been growing between them. That night, after Emma was asleep, they came together not as practical partners, but as lovers, discovering each other anew. Afterward, Xavier held Laurel close, tracing patterns on her skin. "I've been thinking about something," he said quietly. "Reed and his men might come back. Or others like them." Laurel tensed. "What are you suggesting?" "I have a friend in Colorado. He's written about land opening up near Denver. It's good ranching country, growing fast, more law and order." Xavier propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her. "We could sell this place, start fresh somewhere safer for Emma." Laurel considered the idea. This small ranch had been her sanctuary when she had nowhere else to go, but it wasn't the land she loved, it was the man who had opened his home to her. "I'll go wherever you think is best for our family," she said, reaching up to touch his face. "But only if we go together." Xavier smiled, the tension leaving his shoulders. "Always together. I promised you partnership, remember?" "You promised me more than that," Laurel reminded him. "You said, 'You've got me,' when I had no one else. And you kept your word." The decision made, they spent the next month preparing for the move. Xavier found a buyer for the ranch, a family with grown sons who could defend the property if needed. Laurel packed their belongings, surprised at how much they'd accumulated in just a year together. The night before their departure, they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Emma asleep in Xavier's arms. The little girl had recently begun calling him Papa, a word that never failed to bring a tender smile to his face. "Are you sad to leave?" Xavier asked, noticing Laurel's contemplative expression. "Not sad exactly, just thinking about how much has changed." She leaned against his shoulder. "A year ago, I thought my life was over. My husband dead, my father disowning me, nowhere to go with a newborn daughter." Xavier kissed the top of her head. "And now?" "Now I know it was just beginning." She smiled up at him. "You gave me a chance when no one else would. You valued Emma when my own father couldn't see her worth." "Emma is perfect exactly as she is," Xavier said firmly, looking down at the sleeping child. "Any fool can father a son. It takes a real man to raise a daughter right." "And you will," Laurel said confidently. "Though you might get your chance with a son too, eventually." Xavier raised an eyebrow. "Eventually?" Laurel took his hand and placed it gently against her still flat stomach. "Perhaps sooner than we planned." His eyes widened, then filled with joy. "You're certain?" She nodded, her own happiness reflected in his face. "About 2 months along, I think." Xavier carefully shifted Emma to free one arm, pulling Laurel closer. "Boy or girl, it doesn't matter. Our children will grow up knowing they're valued for who they are, not what they are." "That's all I ever wanted," Laurel whispered, resting her head on his shoulder as the last light faded from the sky. The journey to Colorado was long but uneventful. They traveled with a small wagon train for safety, and Xavier's friend met them in Denver with news of a promising property just east of the growing city. The new ranch was everything Xavier had promised: fertile land, clear water, and nearby neighbors who welcomed them warmly. Within a year, they had established themselves, increased their herd, and welcomed a son they named Thomas Henry Kincaid. On the boy's christening day, a surprise visitor arrived, Uncle George Forsyth, looking older and humbled by recent losses. "Your father was wrong," he told Laurel after the ceremony. "About a lot of things. I see that now." Laurel, holding baby Thomas while Emma played at her skirts, regarded her uncle cautiously. "What changed your mind?" "Those men he hired, Reed and his gang. They turned on me, tried to take the ranch by force." George shook his head ruefully. "If your husband hadn't warned the sheriff about their plans, I might not be standing here." Xavier, who had maintained correspondence with their former sheriff, joined them. "It was the right thing to do," he said simply. George nodded. "I came to make amends. And to tell you the Forsyth Ranch is yours if you want it. I'm too old to run it properly." Laurel looked at Xavier, then back at her uncle. "Thank you, but no. We've built something here, something that's ours, based on mutual respect and love. I don't need my father's land to feel whole anymore." George seemed to understand. Before leaving, he pressed a small package into Emma's hands. "Your grandfather was a prideful man, but he did love your mother. This was her mother's, it should stay in the family." Inside was a delicate gold locket containing miniature portraits of Laurel's grandparents. A tangible link to a heritage Emma would now know without its burden of conditional love. That evening, with both children asleep, Xavier and Laurel sat on their new porch, looking out at the land that truly felt like home. "Do you ever regret it?" Xavier asked, saying yes to my practical proposal. Laurel laughed, the sound light and free. The most practical decision I ever made turned out to be the most romantic story of my life. How so? A cowboy who took in a desperate woman and her baby daughter, who promised partnership but gave love, who valued us when others couldn't see our worth. She turned to him, taking his weathered hand in hers. You said, "You've got me," when I had nothing. And now we have everything. Xavier pulled her close, his kiss a promise kept and renewed. Everything indeed. Under the vast Colorado sky, their small ranch house glowed with lamplight, not just shelter, but a home built on the foundation of acceptance, respect, and a love that had grown from the most unexpected beginnings.